how to use all the spells in the Lore of Tempest. Let's go! First up, Gust of the True Flight, plus 30% range, plus 30 accuracy for a nice 36 seconds, only costs a meager 4 winds of magic. It can only be used on a single unit though, unless you use the upgraded version for an extra 4 winds of magic to turn it into an area. So first of all, I decided to do a few tests with this spell to see how effective that extra accuracy really was. Because it's easy to see how extra range would be useful, that allows you to get a few more shots off before an enemy gets to you. But how much is that extra accuracy actually helping? Well, here I've got 2 units of Streltsy shooting at 2 giants, and the unit on the left is buffed up by the Gust of the True Flight spell. You can see the difference in range here. This is the unbuffed unit, this is the buffed unit. So it's a nice bit of extra range that'll probably allow you to get an extra volley or 2 off, and that's just going to be more damage. But as you can see at a glance, there isn't too much damage in the health lost by the giant so far. The giant being shot by the buffed up unit is down to 10,400 health. And the giant being shot by the regular unit is down to 10,000, just under 400 health, so he's taken more damage. They did briefly fight a caster, so maybe she got in an extra hit before she died, but still, from this one test there seems to be no advantage to the extra accuracy. So I did the test again, this time on a slightly larger target, and I put them right at the end of the Streltsy's normal range, because that's where missile unit accuracy really drops off towards the last 20% of its range. This of course meant though that the buffed unit's range was much longer, so it was much nearer to the unit and its accuracy wouldn't be as bad, plus it was getting the plus 30 accuracy, so it surely should be better in this scenario, right? Well, waiting for the very moment the buff wears off now, let's see what the difference in health is between the 2 units. The spider being shot by the buffed unit down to about 4,900, and the other one also 4,900. So it seems like the accuracy does absolutely fuck all. Of course, these spiders were fighting other units, but I don't think it's going to have made that big of a difference. They are fighting exactly the same thing. I did try it out with artillery as well, thinking maybe the accuracy would help little Groms, but no. Once again, after the spell had worn off, the spider being shot by the buffed unit down to 9,300 health, while the one being shot by the unbuffed unit 8,700. So somehow again, the unbuffed unit has outperformed the buffed one. So it seems like this spell will be useful if there's an enemy outside your range and you want to be able to damage them. This will work great and it's very cheap. But if the enemy is inside your normal range, then it's pretty much a worthless spell because the accuracy doesn't really seem to do a lot. The best usage of this spell might be to do something like this with the overcast version, so you can hit an area and hit most of your missile units and then get that extra range so you can start shooting at them way earlier. You can probably get an extra 2 or 3 volleys off, depending on the speed of the enemy, although putting all your units like this close together is a bit risky, so you'll want to try and break them up as soon as the buff runs out, although that then begs the question if this spell was worth it, because while they're running to reposition, they're not going to be able to shoot, and that's lost volleys, which would have been gained by the spell, so it just all seems pointless. So yeah, the extra range of this spell is pretty handy if you can find the right situation to use it, otherwise not much to gain from this. Next we have Hailstorm, a bombardment with pretty reasonable armor piercing overall, 6 winds of magic, so pretty cheap. Overcast it for just an extra 3 winds of magic to make the effect last longer, so more damage. This is your usual type of bombardment spell. It's going to be kind of useless on the front line because you're going to hit your own troops, so you've got to look for those little blobs of enemies wherever they may be and try to fill up the circle as much as possible. As it is pretty cheap though, you could get away with being a little bit wasteful with it, using it on things like strong missile units. You're not going to fill up much of the circle, but you're going to do a good bit of damage to a strong unit. So yeah, it's mostly about looking out for those blobs of infantry wherever they may be. And naturally, things like choke point battles or sieges are going to be good for this because things very often blob up in small tight spaces, and this is a beautiful spot for this kind of spell. If you do get a really good area or some really strong units to use it on, it could be good to go for the overcast version in this case, because for only an extra 3 winds of magic, you can get a lot more from it. So just a simple, easy to use damage spell. Next, Swiftwing. This is an area augment for charge bonus plus 40% and 25% speed, and the overcast version for an extra 3 winds of magic will increase the effect area so you can hit more units with it. So this spell has a couple of ways you can use it. You can either strap it onto a unit and the aura will follow them. As I'm doing here, I've got a couple of units of cavalry going around together. They're going to be pretty much next to each other, so they should both get the buff, but it can be a little bit fiddly if your charging units aren't all aiming at the same target. The other way you could use this spell is putting it down on the ground. Going to use the overcast version here. You can see the area is pretty big now. I cover most of the front line, and then I can charge my units, and when they move into the zone, they'll get the buff. So a couple of ways to deploy this. Can be a little bit fiddly in some situations, but plus 40% charge bonus is a very nice buff. That'll get you a good bit of extra damage done on those charges. The speed might give you an extra bit of collision damage, I guess, but otherwise not really much use for travel. This spell really is going to benefit from having units all grouped together, and normally you don't really run too many units of cavalry around directly together, but maybe if you mix in some lords and heroes and stuff and they'll get the charge bonus boost as well, it could be helpful. And of course, it's not just cavalry that can benefit from this spell. You could use the overcast version to hit a wide area, maybe 3 units, drop that on the front line, and then your frontline infantry units could get that charge bonus boost. That could also be very powerful, although it's going to be most optimally used on anything with a big charge bonus because that 40% is going to be bigger, so things like Winged Lancers and Griffon Legion, probably the best bets. As by default it's an area spell, it suggests it's supposed to have multiple units make use of it, but it only costs 6 winds of magic, so using it on a single unit could be worthwhile if it's one of those stronger charge bonus units. Next we have Biting Wind. Would you believe it? This is a wind spell. Bit of armor piercing damage, stretches a pretty damn long way as well, costs 12 winds of magic. And the overcast version will increase armor piercing damage for an extra 5 winds of magic. Now, straight up, this is the kind of spell I usually don't recommend. You can see I line it up perfectly parallel to my front line, and then it goes off and goes completely to the left and mostly misses. 12 winds of magic straight in the bin. So yeah, this spell has a bit of random luck involved. While you would want it to be a nice straight line, it actually veers off to the left or right, and that's either going to completely miss your enemies or veer off into your own troops. So yeah, personally, I don't like that kind of gamble in battle. I'd rather use spells that are going to do exactly what I tell them to do. That being said, if this spell does come off in a direction that's a bit more favorable to you, it can do some good damage by all means. So it's just very hit or miss, and it's up to you whether you mind a bit of RNG on your spells. Also, because the spell is so long and it goes on for about 4 or 5 units of length, it can be hard to find situations where it's actually going to be useful after the start of the battle. Pre-battle, when units are lined up like this, it could be good, or along a front line, assuming it's all perfectly straight and parallel to each other, or maybe just a long blobby choke point like this, it could be great there, but still, there's a good friendly fire risk in this, so it's up to you whether you want to take the risk with it. For 12 winds of magic, you could use Hailstorm twice, and I think you could get better returns out of that than you will with this spell. And then we have Hawks of Mishka. This is a vortex spell. It is slightly randomly moving, but it doesn't hurt friendly troops, which is very nice. Doesn't have any armor piercing damage at all and costs 13 winds of magic, but does cause Discouraged for 21 seconds, which is minus 16 leadership. You can overcast it for a bit more damage, but honestly, I would ignore the damage of this spell and mostly use it for that minus 16 leadership, because that is pretty damn strong, especially as it lasts 21 seconds. All you have to do is touch one model of the unit with the spell and they'll get that minus 16 leadership, and late in the battle, that could be absolutely devastating for an enemy army. So around mid to late battle, start looking for those blobs of enemies which might be low on leadership. Typically, that'll be the units that are low on health. Drop this spell on them, don't have to worry about hitting your friendly boys, and just let it do its thing. Again, some RNG with this because it might randomly go in a direction that doesn't really hit anything very well, but it's pretty wide, it doesn't move terribly far, so as long as you place it in amongst a bunch of units, it should do its job. And so it's super helpful for routing units off or making them crumble or disintegrate quicker. So keep an eye out whenever you see a group of enemies all together, you could drop this spell to help break their leadership. And that's not to say that the damage that it does is anything to scoff at. Here I dropped it straight on top of a missile unit to see how that would go. We are of course hitting the unit I dropped it on, but it's also touching the other missile unit there that's being shot at, that's injured. So that unit's already lost a bunch of leadership. The extra Discouraged from this spell is going to push it overboard and off it goes. Plus the damage of the spell has taken out the unit that I cast it on. So we got rid of 2 missile units there, plus the rest of the army has run into it. So not to say there's no use for this spell earlier on in a battle, but if an enemy unit's got healthy leadership and the Discouraged doesn't really do anything to them, then it's just damage that you're doing, and well, there's better spells for damage in this lore book than this one. Such as our final spell, Blizzard. Another vortex spell, 100% armor piercing damage on this bad boy though. Does cost a chunky 18 winds of magic however, and comes with frostbite, which is mostly pointless. You can overcast it for a gargantuan 26 winds of magic, increasing the damage and apparently armor piercing damage, even though it was already 100% armor piercing damage, but who knows? So this is a very strong spell by all means. It is a vortex that is stationary, so it doesn't move around, no RNG involved. Dropping the overcast version here on a unit of Chosen to really see how good that armor piercing damage is. Takes off about 3/5 of their health, which is pretty nice I guess, but not for 26 winds of magic. Doesn't kill a single one of them though, just damages them. But of course this is not a spell that's supposed to be used on a single unit. Much like Hailstorm, you're again looking for the massive blobs. The radius of this spell is pretty huge, so it is quite hard to fill it up with enemies to really make it worthwhile. And of course you got to be careful of friendly fire, which is why this one here is kind of badly placed because I'm not hitting that many enemies. But you know, try not to kill my own boys. It's very powerful. What it does hit though, it'll do a lot of damage. It really just depends if you can find the right spot to make the spell cost worthwhile, because 18 winds of magic is quite a lot to spend on a spell, so you really got to make sure you get your magical money's worth, either hitting a lot of units or just a few very strong ones. It's the kind of spell that I won't really plan to use, but I'll keep an eye out on the battlefield, and if I see a really nice blob of enemies that'll be absolutely destroyed by this spell, that's when I'll drop it. If maybe it's just a small pile of enemies, I'd probably rather opt for Hailstorm instead, as I could use that 3 times for the price of 1 Blizzard. So overall, a very strong spell if you can find the right spot to use it. And there we go. I hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. If you want more of these, I got a playlist right here. Do consider checking out YouTube membership if you're interested. You can get early access and some exclusive videos and shizzer. Shizzer? I also won't ever say shizzer in there as well, so you don't have to worry about that. I'll see you in the future.